He served as a peacekeeper at Ludlow. As soon as the Klan reared its head, Philip Van Cise became one of its earliest and most vocal opponents.
He was the type of man who would prosecute his own grandmother if she violated the law, and by George, that's the kind of public official we needed. For instance, a packing of juries.
The jury commissioner, being a Ku Kluxer himself, the jury lists were made up in the office of Dr. Locke down on Glenarm Street.
I would say 75% of the police department belonged to the Klan.
You didn't get a promotion if you weren't a member of the Klan.
Van Cise decides to investigate the Klan, gets 5 members of his staff to join, infiltrate the Klan to try to build up evidence against them.
In the summer of 1922, the Klan holds its first public meeting in Estes Park with thousands of hooded Klansmen gathering. Within 1 year, Denver's Mayor Benjamin Stapleton openly supports the Klan and offers city space for them to spread their message. While the Klan's popularity grows, so does their illegal actions, including kidnapping and conspiracy.
Patrick Walker, a 19-year-old, supposedly had intimate relationships with a young woman. John Galen Locke found out about this, and so they kidnapped him, and they threatened to beat him or even kill him if he didn't marry the young woman. And so Walker did so, but then he went to the police. Ultimately, Locke and other conspirators were indicted for kidnapping. There are dozens of accounts of harassment, of intimidation, of cross burnings in people's yards, of bombs on people's front porches, of beatings, of kidnapping.
Walter Walker was described as a little Napoleon. He was already the most powerful Democratic politician on the Western Slope. He runs the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel, and he wanted to be the Grand Cyclops of the Grand Junction Klan. It was in August of 1924. The Grand Junction Daily Sentinel described it as silent and impressive display, estimated at 500 fully gowned Klansmen walking down Main Street. 3 crosses burned in the night. Dr. John Galen Locke himself had come over, so the Klan is fully here.
In the fall of 1924, things did not go as Walter Walker planned, and Grand Junction Klansmen choose realtor D.B. Wright as their first exalted Cyclops. Walker, who helped to bring the Klan to the area, did not take this rejection well and slowly begins to use his newspaper to thwart their efforts. In Denver, the district attorney Philip Van Cise and 100 prominent Republicans formed the Visible Government League to fight the KKK. Van Cise holds a public meeting to expose Klan secrets, but it's disrupted. According to the Denver Express, it was a meeting hall packed with enraged, shouting, shrieking men and women gone mad with fanatic Klan frenzy.
They were pretty roused up on both sides, Klan and anti-Klan.
And it was just on the same line with the boycotts that the Klan put out. They would distribute these mimeograph sheets on who to patronize and who not to patronize. Catholics and Jews really felt the pressure.
These hoods and robes that were sold for a rather substantial price added to the coffers of the Klan. They filled the heart of the Negro and the businessman of non-Ku Klux connection with fear. They refused to patronize anybody who didn't belong to the Klan. The economic boycotting was fantastic. People sensing power. They worked through the Republican Party. They took possession of the Republican Party. They worked in the precincts. Their leaders attended the caucuses, and they gained control, practically 100% of the Republican Party at that time.
The membership increased very rapidly, and the members of the city council, from the mayor on down, all the city officials, with very few exceptions from members of the Klan.
You couldn't get elected to anything in the city and county of Denver unless you were affiliated with the Ku Klux Klan or had their blessing.
In the election of 1924, Klansmen won overwhelming control of the Colorado state legislature.
The peak of the Klan's influence in many ways was the embrace of Denver Mayor Ben Stapleton of the Klan ideology and acceptance of their support and his use of them. It harnessed the power of a very angry white group that thought things were changing for them.
He was kind of a mild-mannered, nerdish-looking guy with his spectacles and does start to clean up the city.
Ben Stapleton was a politically ambitious person, so he gets elected, and then the disillusionment hits pretty fast, and he is up for a recall. And the only way to survive his recall election is to be very explicit in assuring the Klan leadership, I'm with you. The Klan can trust me to be your official. So he does survive his recall with very clear Klan support.
Philip Van Cise lost his re-election bid for Denver District Attorney because of his war on the Ku Klux Klan.
Clarence Morley agrees to sell his soul. He wanted to be governor, he got to be governor, and he got to make statements about the great movement that he was a part of.
Clarence Morley is a tall, kind of spiny man. He looks almost mousy, particularly next to John Galen Locke, his hero. He's only in office for one term, and after that he's actually indicted for mail fraud and our only governor ever to go to prison. The Klan kept meeting, and every time they outgrew their facilities, so they finally went to this huge building, the Overland Park Mills, where they had huge gatherings.
Allegedly, more than 30,000 people showed up at a Klan rally. Large-scale public rallies were one of the hallmarks of the Klan, to show their power, to show their unity, and to show the potential for intimidation that they had.
So each of these Klan meetings would be a plain rabble-rousing. Dr. Locke was very emotional. He was a very effective speaker. After anything he said, there was tremendous applause.
They were famous for their gatherings on Lookout Mountain, just outside of Golden. They would burn a cross there, have a big ritual, and you get a lecture on 100% Americanism. And of course, you'd be told how to vote.
By this time, Walker is not a member of the Klan. In fact, he'd been thrown out for not being supportive enough. The Klan not only takes over the city council, they start placing some of their members with the Grand Junction police force. But they've made a very significant enemy in Walter Walker.
By 1925, the Invisible Empire is at the height of its power in Colorado. They are highly visible across the state with public picnics, banquets, boxing tournaments, and performances by the Imperial Klan Band.
They have charity events, they have concerts.
For a group that claimed that it preferred to operate in secret, the Ku Klux Klan loved spectacle. And the Klan, of course, created its own newspapers, the Rocky Mountain American. The Klansmen were sophisticated marketers who would use popular culture in order to achieve their ends.
Your everyday average white person may not have had such bigoted views, but they certainly condoned it. It was made very clear in Denver that black folks couldn't live beyond a certain street.
They would post notices on the Immaculate Conception Cathedral or Temple Emmanuel's doors reminding that the Catholics or the Jews were not Americans. They would pass out pink slips into the mailboxes of African Americans or Jews or Catholics or immigrants, reminding them that they're not American.
Older African Americans will tell you that the Klan initiated a major race riot, marching in, burning houses, physically removing people, shooting, stabbing. There were deaths.
There were many people who stood up to criticize the Klan, to expose them for what they were. Clarence Holmes was an African-American dentist who formed the Cosmopolitan Group, an interracial group of people who came together and socialized, had a cross burned on his front lawn. The Denver Catholic Register made an intense effort to expose the inner workings of the Klan, and the editor, Father Smith, was almost run over in the streets.
Monsignor Gregory Smith makes a point of trying to get in and listing those people and then do a counter boycott. Don't go to patronize any of these people. So he kept fighting the Klan constantly.
With so many efforts going to take down the Klan, the tides started to turn. Grand Dragon Locke was arrested on charges of kidnapping. Sensing the change, Denver's Mayor Stapleton decides to turn on the group that helped keep him in office.
Stapleton, who was going to be their creature, their guy, he ends up recognizing the vulnerability of the Klan.
They got too domineering for him. He just couldn't follow the orders of Dr. Locke and his subordinates.
And initiating some vice raids against Klan's members and actually being a force that points out the wickedness within. He seems to be a person who did what he had to do for political expediency.
He recruited and deputized American legionnaires to raid Klan-operated gambling dens and bootlegging facilities. He joined the Klan primarily to receive their political support, and when the winds of political fortunes blew against the Klan, he was one of the first people to turn on them.
Ironically, Stapleton comes up with one of the most eloquent denunciations. True Americanism does not hide under a sheet.
And then when it became known that the Internal Revenue Service was investigating the income of the Klan, and particularly Dr. Locke, they held a special meeting, and Dr. Locke sitting there with his head in his hands.
The Imperial Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, Hiram Evans, asked John Galen Locke to step down.
He was accused by the National Klan of keeping more than his share of what you paid for membership dues.
Locke was ultimately indicted for tax evasion and spent some time in jail. And the Klan split into two groups in 1925. The Ku Klux Klan, which moved its headquarters to Canyon City, and the Minutemen of Colorado, which was a nativist, white nationalist group run by John Galen Locke. Once America really began to enjoy the prosperity of the post-war boom, Americans felt that the anxieties that had driven them into the Klan were not as important anymore. And once the Klan was shown to be corrupt, the center couldn't hold.
There's a traffic stop in downtown Grand Junction. A Mexican-American bootlegger is actually killed by local Klan. Walter Walker now uses his newspaper to go against the Klan. And right after this, Walker is walking down Main Street and he is accosted by one of the Klan policemen, beaten in broad daylight. The next day, Walker begins a strong editorial campaign against the Klan. 2 weeks later, Walker's son is mysteriously accosted and beat up. The final blow was the 1927 Grand Junction City Council elections. His influence was strong, and the Klan is entirely swept out of power. Certainly his legacy has suffered. Was he a man of his times? Of course. A lot of people were joining the Klan in the 1920s.
It was a big step down for the Klan to leave Denver and move to Canyon City. It represented the decline of the Klan, that they could no longer operate in an intense public arena like Denver.
In Canyon City, there's a lot of Klan activity, paving roads, building schools. The Canyon City Klan seems to have been more of a public works and institution building Klan.
They come to power in 24. By 26, 27, they're already on the way out.
There's some theories among political scientists that when folks get a lot of power, unless it's checked, the power becomes unhinged. And so it was a hubris thing and an arrogance that caused the Klan to fall in Colorado. I mean, at some point, folks come to their senses. At least you hope they do.
In 1928, Grand Dragon Fred Arnold dies of blood poisoning, bringing the Colorado KKK to an end. The fiery cross on his headstone blazing for eternity.
Between 1920s and the 1970s, the KKK existed all over the country in various incantations. The KKK existed in the Denver, Colorado area, Lakewood, Colorado, and in Colorado Springs. It was not organized. That was one reason why I, as a black man, was able to conduct an undercover investigation and place 3 undercover cops into their group and conduct an undercover investigation for approximately 7.5 months. These guys were always carrying guns, because all they talked about was wanting to kill blacks, wanting to kill Jews, wanting to burn crosses. At any time, my guys could have arrested about 9 of these guys for illegal possession of firearms. But we let it go, because we were hoping to take this to more advanced criminal charges, which never materialized. We had 2 gay clubs in Colorado Springs at that time. They told us they wanted to bomb these 2 gay clubs. One of their aims was to try and steal automatic weapons from Fort Carson, Colorado. We determined that they had 2 military personnel assigned to NORAD, the North American Air Defense Command. So my investigation reached the Pentagon. The Grand Wizard, David Duke, on January 10, 1979, made an appearance in Colorado Springs. David Duke was the new face of the Ku Klux Klan. He never wore his Klan robe in public. He never used the so-called N-word. He was always very polite, very well-groomed, very professional in public. In private, he was hellfire. He changed the face of the Klan. He professionalized it. The case ended because the chapter president wanted Ron Stallworth to become the chapter leader. And when I went to my chief of police and told him this, he said, shut the investigation down now. Ron Stallworth Klansman disappeared that day. During the entire 7.5 months of this investigation, no cross was ever burned in Colorado Springs. The KKK of the late 70s didn't end. People have to get out of their head the fact that the KKK ends. They never end. They go dormant.
in the 1920s, in the 1960s. In the 1990s, there was a resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan.
The ideals and the beliefs that allowed for the Klan to rise to power in Colorado, those things never really left. The aftermath carried on for years and years, and some would argue it still does. And even in the way that we interact with each other, there's still that carryover effect.
Hate-inspired vandalism continues to this day. KKK is spray-painted on homes and vehicles numerous times in the Denver metro area in 2016, and swastikas mysteriously appear on schools and religious buildings every few years.